Today on the Roundhouse, we'll be talking to a company that specializes in using speeder cars for everything from tourist railroading to community outreach. All aboard!
In days past, the roundhouse was where the railroad worker united with the steam locomotive, each to prepare for the journey ahead. Today, it's where we examine the history, the industry, the machines, the hobby, and the passion behind railroading. News, interviews, stories, and more. So climb aboard. This is The Roundhouse.
Welcome to the Roundhouse. I'm your host, Nick Kozarek, and this is episode number 122 of our Trains and Railroading podcast, where we're talking about everything in the industry and the hobby, you name it, and we discuss it. Today, we're talking to Ken Marty. He's the president of West Coast Railroaders Group, a company that focuses on track speeders, using them for everything from tourist railroading to track inspections, fire suppression, and some really touching, inspirational community outreach opportunities. Before we get to that, though, I want to give a thank you to those of you who are supporting the Roundhouse through Patreon, the platform that you can sign up for as little as $1 a month and be supporting the Roundhouse financially, which I deeply appreciate those of you who do. And at $5 a month, you're hearing this episode a week before anybody else and future episodes. Patreon.com/The Roundhouse, and I appreciate your support. Our guest today is the president of West Coast Railroaders Group. Please welcome to the Roundhouse, Mr. Ken Marty.
Thank you, Nick. It's a pleasure to be here.
It's so good to have you on the show, Ken. What is the West Coast Railroaders Group?
West Coast Railroaders Group, commonly referred to as WCRG, is a group of railroad professionals that provide on-track equipment services to railroads throughout the West using vintage railroad motor cars. Our operations are unique in nature as that we blend older railroad equipment in a modern railroad operating environment. As president founder, I've been in the railroad industry for 27 years myself, working for switching operations, regionals, class ones in both freight and passenger service. WCRG follows much of the same operating practices and procedures that railroad and contractors alike do, including our training and qualifications, compliance with required efficiency testing, as well as random drug and alcohol testing. Although our equipment is vintage, our motor cars are all outfitted with modern safety appliances you'd see on many railroads, such as radios, shunting, outward-facing cameras, and the like. So our operations, while we use vintage equipment, if you will, from the 40s up to the 80s, everything we do is kind of on par with what you'd see in a modern railroad operating environment.
What led you to founding this company? What's your experience been up to this point?
Well, as starting out, going back, I guess, to my childhood, I always had an interest and fascination for railroading and trains, and ended up, following it for a successful career in life, and also had an interest in anything mechanical, whether it's cars, trucks, tractors, you name it, anything that's mechanical and old. I always liked tinkering with, and actually picked up my first motor car about 1993, and just kind of tinkered with things, and then bought a few other ones that happened to be some older what people would refer to as hit and miss or popper style engines, an old 2-cycle 1-cylinder engine that were really unique to the motor car itself. Was built by the Fairmont. They actually built their own engines, and so they were really, really something that was mechanically unique, and took a liking to those, and then decided that railroads might not use these anymore because there's much more modern equipment. I mean, nobody can discount that a high rail is a wonderful tool on the railroad, having an 8-foot pickup bed and the comfort of heating and air conditioning and all of those things. I mean, those can't be discounted, of course, but there's still a role for these older machines, and I wanted to take that and found an organization that could use these older machines in not only a modern road operating environment, but in museum and tourist operations where these machines really shine and fit in. I mean, there's nothing like having a 1940s motor car doing fire patrol behind a 100-year-old steam locomotive. It fits. It's period correct. It's what the tourist railroads and the museums like to see behind their equipment. Everything just fits the bill. It's perfect. So that was kind of really my beginning goal of founding the organization. Many people don't know this, but West Coast Railroads Group was founded at a Subway restaurant table. I was on a layover for my train, which I was waiting to take back, and I had been talking to some of my coworkers and industry professionals that I knew and had this dream of, is anybody interested in doing this? Because one man can't do this alone. So ended up picking up a few industry professionals, and we ended up registering the website there that day at the Subway table, and that was the start of West Coast Railroads Group up to the point now to where we know it is of today.
Interesting. That's what caught me when you were sending me information about your company, is that from a convenience standpoint, you're right. The high rail has a great deal of modern amenities and advantages. I've always been curious to what the appeal of the track car is, because there are so many people who own them and there's such a fan community around that. For you, Ken, what is that appeal?
Well, I think the appeal to me and a lot of people is that camaraderie of what railroading used to be. I mean, going back to the 1950s, even with, you ran these motor cars on a track car lineup where you got a lineup at the beginning of the day and it said, train 124 is going to be here at noontime, so don't foul the track ahead of. And that was the only thing you got. So you went off that lineup. So if the train was late, it was on the track car operator to make sure he knew where that train was. Now, in today's modern operations, of course, we don't operate like that. It's a much, much more tighter controlled environment with authorities and dispatching and protection of on-track equipment. We never use lineups anymore. But that's a lot of the lure, I think, of it. And we see a lot of excursion participants that we work with, because West Coast Railroads Group is basically kind of broken off into two fractions. There's on-track equipment operators that actually go out and do our work with the railroads, whether it's a track inspection or fire patrol. And then we have our excursion services, where we're using professional railroaders to guide non-railroaders that happen to own these cars. And in those situations, what we see is it's a generally older population, 60s and 70s, that run these motor cars. It's retired couples, and it's everything from doctors and lawyers. But the common theme that we always hear from these people is, I saw that when I was growing up as a kid, or I saw the motor cars, the putt-putts, what they like to call them, going down the tracks when I was growing up, and that signal maintainer stopped and gave me a ride to the other end of town. And something like that triggered their fascination in these cars. And now that, they're not used anymore and they're out there on the free market to buy them, and a lot of people are retired, they think, wow, I'm going to go back and live my childhood and get one of these cars and fix it up and go around, whether it's the West Coast or the whole country or wherever. And this is worldwide also. And they're going to go and they're going to run these cars, and it brings back some of their childhood for them. It brings back a simpler time in America for them that everybody's longing for. So, when you go on these excursions and you see every type of car from a 1930s Sheffield to a late 1980s Fairmont, and it's fantastic, because the camaraderie in the motor car organizations is fantastic. I mean, like I said, we have everybody from doctors to lawyers to auto mechanics, but when they're out there and they get together and they're on the rails, it's all about the equipment and the experience of just how unique these vintage motor cars are.
And they are unique, and they are very, I would almost say, honest machines, because they are so bare bones that if something is wrong with them, you don't have to strip it far to find out what the thing is. The engine is sitting right there. All of the moving parts are right there. So it's something that in this day and age where there's so many electronic devices and even vehicles, such as high rails, that are being at least partially controlled by electronics, it's refreshing to see something that is 100% mechanical, especially something like a hit or miss engine. And that's very honest of a machine.
Yes, absolutely. And Fairmont even marketed their cars in several of their advertisements and publications. They showed track maintainers out in the field, taking the cylinder head off and taking the crankshaft out of the car. These could be done at a section house, and the maintainer could actually, fix it with very limited skills and knowledge and tools. And that was one of the high points of these cars. Plus the fact that Fairmont never really thought that they would be this reliable. And I'm sure that if you were working at the Fairmont factory in 1940, you would never imagine in 2022 people would be still running these same machines, in excursion service or even railroad service for that matter, but still running these machines, on a weekly or daily basis. I mean, who would have ever thought they would last that long? And unfortunately, a lot of these machines were scrapped. I purchased about 7 or 8 of these motor cars from a couple in Phoenix, Arizona, and they had sat in their crane and rigging yard for about 40 years until they finally decided to sell them because they realized that they were getting older and there was nothing they were going to do. But they actually bought these cars from the ATSF in 1975, and there at the time Santa Fe was scrapping everything, and there was dumpsters full of motor cars at the auction, and this couple begged the Santa Fe, please take those cars out of the dumpster, we'll buy them all. And Santa Fe said, nope, they're in the dumpster, they're going to scrap. So many of these cars were scrapped. So what remains today is a fraction of the amount of cars that were actually built and operated at one time. So there's still a lot of them surviving, but there was thousands and thousands and thousands of them that were scrapped or left along the right of way and got buried or whatever the case may be. But it's really great to be able to keep history alive, and that's kind of what we're trying to do.
One of the advantages that you brought up is that from a tourist railroad perspective, there's a great deal to be gained from having this support equipment, we'll call it, that looks to be of the era and period correct, as opposed to something more modern following along. What are some of the tourist railroads and museums that you've partnered with, and what kind of partnerships and services have you provided for them?
Well, we've provided everything from track inspections to fire patrol to other unique services, but our number one service, if you will, is our fire patrol services. The West is always dry out here, especially from May till October. And so fire danger is always a big thing. Some of the railroads are required to actually provide some kind of patrol and protection. The Virginia Truckee Railroad is one of our railway. There's actually two: the Virginia and Truckee Railroad, and the reconstruction for the Virginia Truckee Road are two separate agencies, but they run basically the same service. And so we have provided the fire patrol and protection for that operation. And that runs from May through October, and we are on our 10th year now providing that service. So we will have generally 1 to 2 motor cars out there and 1 to 2 what we call fire patrol push cars that are basically outfitted with water and brooms and shovels and picks and those kind of things. So if there is something that does happen, we can catch that. So that operation runs several thousand miles a year. We're running a lot of miles on that railroad. We've also worked with Roaring Camp Railroads. A few years ago, they brought a historic steam engine in to town, and it was the first time since 1956 that steam had actually been on that section of the railroad. So that was a fantastic 3-day event with a sold-out train, and it went down from the town of Felton down to Santa Cruz, and we provided that fire patrol and protection for that operation. So we've had some really, really unique opportunities that we've really been glad to be a part of. But like I say, our fire patrols are one of our biggest services out here in the West, being that the West is always so dry. Our excursions are also another thing that we do. We provide motor car excursions to the railroads. A lot of them that we work with fire patrol will also do excursions. And we try to keep those excursions to fundraisers, so they could be a benefit for Honor Flight, they could be a benefit for Mighty Oaks or Make-A-Wish or some other needy organizations that sometimes the railroads say we want a fundraiser for XYZ Foundation, and we'll gladly do that for them. So Our services are really unique in nature, and like I said, you could find us one weekend on the Goose Lake Railway in Oregon, and on the next weekend on the Nevada Southern in Las Vegas, or the next weekend after that in Santa Cruz, California. Running along the Pacific Ocean. So our services are kind of tailored to what railroads need what and where they take us.
On your website, in the Fire Patrol Services section, I'm looking at one of the photos you have, and there's something wonderfully charming about seeing this motor car, a four-wheel motor car, and with two trailers, with the tanks, and then all of these upright tools, the brooms, the shovels, the pickaxes. There's something wonderfully just upfront about and Spartan about that as a piece of equipment. And for you, because you're following right behind the train, I imagine that way what you're dealing with is a little bit of ember, a little bit of spark that when you're getting to it isn't a big deal, but left unattended for even an hour would be a much greater deal.
Correct, and tie fires or even vegetation fires along the ties can happen. So that's why we're there, is to catch those little things before they end up being a massive forest fire, which is very possible. Is again, as dry as the West is, it's everything we do is so dangerous out here. We have to be just so careful.
Of course. And then when you talk about partnering with these nonprofit organizations to provide excursions and rides, how do people's expectations shift when they see what it's like to ride on a track car? Most people think of riding on a train, they're thinking of riding on a coach. What are some of the reactions that you get out of people who are traveling in a very different way?
Well, it's a pretty unique experience, and most of the time when we're done, where we get to where we're going, or we have a layover or a lunch stop, it's all smiles and thank you. I mean, some of these people are blown away by just how unique of an experience. You're down low, you're right, you're just 2 feet off the tracks, and you're down low, and you can see everything. You're not just looking out of a 3 foot by 3 foot train window. You see the landscape, you see everything. It's really a unique opportunity. When we do our veterans fundraisers, we'll invite the local veterans to come out and ride with us, and we've had so many veterans come out and just thank us. And this is the most unique thing we've ever seen and done. And same thing, we'll often have people come up to us when we're doing fire patrol on the Virginia Truckee that are there for the train. They want to ride the train, but they see this and they go, "Can you take us on this?" I said, "Well, if you bought a ticket, absolutely we can." So a lot of times people will forego riding the train to hop on with us, and they'll get done with us when we get into town and go, "Wow, this was the most fantastic thing I've ever done and seen. I didn't even know something like this existed." So yeah, we do really enjoy bringing the general public out, people that have never seen a motor car or thought these exist. I mean, it's one thing to bring an excursion participant out. They know what they are. They know the deal. They run excursions all the time, so they kind of know the drill. But to people that have never seen one and walk up to them and actually offer them an experience, it's pretty fantastic. And it's one of the things I really enjoy about this organization is that we can do this. We can do this. We can bring people that have never seen these cars before and give them an experience. And in some cases, we've seen them go on to actually buy motor cars and say, "Wow, I took a ride with you. This is so much fun. I want to be part of this." So you keep bringing the public in, and you try to keep building interest by the public, because we need to keep these motor cars alive. If we fall by the wayside and these cars aren't operated anymore, who's going to know they ever existed? So by our operations of running these cars, doing motor car excursions, and all the other things that we do, we're keeping history alive for these pieces of equipment that would otherwise be somebody's yard art.
The Strasburg Railroad is an institution in the heritage railroad industry, and its Mechanical Services Department is proud to lead the way. With the knowledge and experience that has created one of the most reliable steam railroading experiences in the country, the Strasburg Railroad is excited to offer their expertise to the rest of the industry. Strasburg's professional team provides consulting and technical assistance to take your steam locomotive or railcar project from idea to finished product. They stand behind their work and always strive to meet their customers' needs for quality, historic accuracy, and reliability at a price that is fair. Unlike many competitors, they feature a fully equipped boiler, railcar, and machine shop, so the work gets done in-house, helping you to get more for your money. Send your inquiries to mechanical@strasburgrailroad.com and let the professionals get to work for you. One of the photos that you sent me that I'm really interested to know the story behind is of an Amtrak California commuter train arrived at a platform, and then in the foreground there's a speeder painted up with the Make-A-Wish logo, and it's painted in blue in the foreground, so you've got this little speeder with this big commuter engine. What's the story behind that?
That day, which was in January of 2020, was a wish reveal for a child named Adam who wanted to take a train trip across country via Amtrak. So I guess we need to start out with how we got started with the Make-A-Wish Foundation, and it's kind of really a unique story, if you will. Going back probably 8 years ago now, there was a child named Miles Scott who wanted to be Bat Kid, and he wanted to do this in the city of San Francisco. So the Make-A-Wish Foundation not only made this happen, but they gave this kid a fantastic and unforgettable day of being Batman in the city of San Francisco. The whole city basically shut down and opened up for this child. I mean, they had actors there. They had Batmobile. He went from building to building chasing villains. I mean, this was just amazing. And not only did this make national news, it made worldwide news of what they did for this 4-year-old child. And I remember watching the stories because I lived in the Bay Area at the time, and it literally dominated the headlines for 3 to 4 days. And I just kept thinking in the back of my head, that was such a fantastic thing they did for that child. Why can't we do something like that in the rail industry? We have the talent. We have trains. Kids love trains. What kid doesn't love trains? Why can't we partner with Make-A-Wish Foundation or other foundations to do something similar to this? Of course, it's not going to be on a grand scale like that, but why not? Because think about it. If you're Make-A-Wish and you call up any big class one, yeah, I've got a kid I want to take on a train, they're probably going to hang the phone up on you. You got to get to the right people in the right departments to make those things happen. So I happened to run a crazy idea by the owner of the Virginia Truckee Railroad, Tom Gray, who's also a very good friend of mine. And I said, Tom, you got this wonderful railroad here with all this historic equipment in a perfect location, and we've got these motor cars and a team of people. I'd like to partner with Make-A-Wish Foundation and get on their list. So if there's a child that wants a train-themed wish, that they know to call us. They know to call me or you or my team or your team, and they can say, hey, we have a child that wants to ride a train. What can you do for him? And before I was even done with my sentence, Tom said, we're going to do it. And so we actually met with the Northern California, Northeastern California, and Northern Nevada chapter of the Make-A-Wish Foundation and promoted, hey, we have a railroad here, we've got motor cars, we've got these two organizations coming together to partnership with you guys to do whatever you need to bring a child and have a train-themed wish. So we did that and didn't hear nothing for a little while, and then about 6 months later, we got a call, and Make-A-Wish says, well, we know this is impossible, but we have a child that wants to operate Amtrak California Zephyr over Donner Pass. We know you can't make that happen, but, maybe you could get him on, a steam engine or something. And so, honestly, I said, you know what? I don't think I can make that happen. But I happened to work for Amtrak as an engineer at the time, and I said, I will make every attempt possible to at least see if I can make that happen. So this was in June of 2014 when this wish happened. I had initially went to our local management and our local union, and local management said there's no way we can make that happen. Don't waste your time. I then had approached the union. The union gave me the email of the president of Amtrak. They said, send him an email. Tell him what you want to do. You never know what he might say. So, it was kind of a shot in the dark, if you will. So I ended up typing up an email to Joe Boardman, who was then the president of Amtrak, and within 20 minutes, I had an email back saying, we'll make this happen. And Joe did make it happen. That child actually got to run Amtrak number 6 from Sacramento to Reno. And that was one of the amazing wishes that we were partnered with. We were partnered with Union Pacific. We were partnered with the Brotherhood of Locomotive Engineers and Trainmen. We were partnered with Amtrak. He got a key to the city of Sacramento. He stopped at Roseville. Union Pacific gave him numerous things. When we got into Reno, Matthew Parker, who is on the Nevada State Legislative Board, presented him with a letter of recognition from the governor of the state of Nevada. It was just amazing. After he got to Reno, he got a limo ride to the Virginia Truckee Railroad, where he spent the weekend with us, riding steam trains and the fire patrol. And then after that, he was taken over to the Portola Railroad Museum to operate a historic diesel before the family went back. So that's really how we got started with the Make-A-Wish Foundation, and that wish was our first big wish, and it's probably something I don't even know if we could recreate it again the way the industry is. But that child at the time was 8 years old, and he had a congenital heart defect, and he had 8 open heart surgeries at that time. Today, the child is doing good. He's 16 years old, and he's living a good life. So, but that's an experience him and I will never forget. It was something fantastic, and it was all a team effort of all the people that put it together, and it was really fantastic.
That is an incredible story and shows why community outreach is so important for all of us in rail preservation. It's very easy to think that just because we have it, people will come to us, but to make these proactive decisions, to have these partnerships with whether it be national organizations of that caliber, but even local or state level nonprofits, could be really beneficial for a whole host of reasons.
Absolutely. So one of the things that we learned from doing more Wish Kids was, while things were working great with the Virginia Truckee Railroad, we realized that some of these kids were too sick to travel very far. And we had one child that was sick with leukemia, and he had came to the V&T for a train-themed wish. He loved the Polar Express, and that's what he wanted. And it happened to be Christmas time, and the Polar Express was going on. And so we invited the family to come up, make it happen. They got motor car rides. He got to ride on the Polar Express. The family all got gifts. It was another fantastic wish. But what we realized was he was very sick that day, and he powered through it, but he was sick. So one of the things that we took away from that second wish was we need to do two things. We need to come out with more railroads to be able to bring these wishes. It's great to have this railroad in the metropolitan Reno area, but we need railroads in the Bay Area and other places. We need railroads close to San Francisco because it's such a huge population, and there's a huge Make-A-Wish chapter there. So we had started branching out to other railroads like Roaring Camp Railroads and others to say, can we bring these kids here? Which, of course, they were all for. So the other thing we realized was that Make-A-Wish needs an industry standout. They need a leader in an organization that can go to these railroads that are railroaders in many cases like us, that can say, hey, we want to be able to bring kids to your railroad. I don't care if it's Union Pacific or BNSF. There's no reason why they can't neither. There's just no reason that they can't participate. And in most cases, they do want to participate. You have to find the right people to get to in the organizations. So we decided to paint up a 1946 non-operational Fairmont motor car in the Make-A-Wish Foundation's colors and logos. And on the side of it, it has their Make-A-Wish logo, and then on top it says, share the power of a wish. And that's exactly what we're trying to do. We're trying to share that power of a wish with kids and railroads that are willing to put those connections together. So that motor car is actually a non-functional motor car. It doesn't run because they won't let us bring it into hotels and conference centers and some of the other indoor venues that it goes to. And you can see that car during wish reveals, where in the case of the Amtrak train, that was a wish reveal for Adam. So we had brought the car out, the train had came in, and then when all operations were suspended and after job briefings and all the modern safety things you would see on a railroad are done, we set the car in front of the locomotive, and then the family did a photo shoot with that car and the train and the locomotive engineers that were running that train that day. So you can see that Make-A-Wish car anywhere from, a Wish Kid reveal to a Make-A-Wish fundraiser they have somewhere, to an actual wish granting experience where the child's actually on that wish day, or a photo shoot for where they want to do promotional flyers. And also on our motor car rides fundraisers on several railroads, we will do a Make-A-Wish motor car ride fundraiser day, to where we have one motor car and then we have a passenger carrying trailer, and then we have that Make-A-Wish car on the other end of that, and we'll go out maybe a mile or two and then come right back to the same spot. And the general public is invited to ride and pay a $5 or $10 fee, whatever it's set. And then that weekend we'll raise money for that local Make-A-Wish chapter. So that motor car is very unique. It's been to a lot of places, and it's been featured in a lot of Make-A-Wish kid events. So we're really proud of that. And that's just one of our commitments to the Make-A-Wish Foundation. Not all of these wishes are happy endings, though. We have lost kids. We lost Benjamin. He loved Thomas the Tank. He was 8 years old. That was another wish that was granted in the Reno area on the Virginia Truckee Railroad. Thomas the Tank, what happened to be coming in a month or so when they wanted the wish, and so we got him, a Thomas the Tank whole day. And it's just not the V&T. It's Union Pacific and BNSF both, through my connections. I'll call them up and say, hey, I need a goodie bag, for a child. It's 6 years old or 8 years old or 12. Can you send me some stuff? And, a couple days later, I'll get a care package with everything from hats to UP teddy bears to everything you can think of. And then these items are all presented to the child, at the day of the event. So it's really fantastic. But there are some sad endings, and Benjamin was one of those sad endings. No child should be taken from any parent at 8 years old. It's heart-wrenching sometimes. And one of the worst ones for me personally was a child named Victor, who was 6 years old, that came to us just a few years ago. And he came through us through the Save Protect Foundation, which is a different foundation. It's not Make-A-Wish, but they do outreach to the community, and this family needed help. And so it was just kind of ironic how it happened, because I was having lunch with Tom Gray, the owner of the Virginia Truckee Railroad, and his phone rings. And we're sitting at lunch, and he's going, yeah, okay. And he hands his cell phone to me and says, you need to talk to this guy. And so I get on the other end. He goes, this is Johnny Larkins from the Save and Protect Foundation. We have a 6-year-old child that has 2 weeks to live with a brain tumor, and all he wants to do is ride a train before he dies. And I almost dropped the phone. And I looked at Tom and I said, we'll do everything, right? Absolutely. And so we set up a day on the Virginia and Truckee Railroad where he could come up and ride the fire patrol and ride the steam engine and ride the diesel train and just have a day. And that was a tough one, because we all knew he only had a week and a half or 2 weeks to live. And I took him up in the cab of the steam engine, and the engineer was there and the fireman was there, and they all knew what was going on, because it was all briefed on in the morning. We have this terminally ill child that's coming today. Do your best to, give him a time of his life. And I carried him up onto the steam engine, and he couldn't reach the whistle, so I lifted him up, and he pulled on the steam whistle with the biggest smile on his face. And the engineer and the fireman both looked away with tears in their eyes, because they knew what was happening. And this child looked like he was just already in heaven by just being there and going through this experience. And it was tough for them. And these are grown men, and then they have families, and they understand. It's just, but to be able to give that kid that day, it was so important to all of us. And unfortunately, about a week and a half later, his mother called me and said, Victor's had a stroke. He's in the hospital in Reno. Would you like to go see him before he passes away? And I said, I would like to go see him. And so my wife and I went down and seen him in the hospital. And this is something that I'll never forget, is walking in this hospital room with this poor little child that's 6 years old dying, and he's laying on a full-size hospital bed, and he's just laying there paralyzed from having a stroke. And I just thought, I'm a father. I have 2 children. God help me if that was ever my children. And it was that day was horrible, seeing that poor child like that. But I walked out of the hospital knowing that we gave that child what he wanted. That was his wish, to be on a train and to ride a train and to do all those things. We gave him that wish. We gave him what he really wanted. And for all of my guys, we all just went, wow, that it was wonderful that we did that for him. And that's what we have to focus on. And we need to stay focused on doing these events for other children that want these events. And he passed away about 4 days after being in the hospital. And the family invited me to the funeral, and I went to the funeral and the service, and they had several pictures of him on the railroad there. And one of the most memorable pictures they had was an engineer named Bill Willits, a retired Southern Pacific engineer, he must have 45 years of experience on the railroad. Wonderful man. And Victor was running the locomotive with him, with Victor's little hand on the automatic brake valve and Bill's hand over his. And it was just such a moving picture to what all of these railroaders did to try to make that day for him. And I always say railroaders have the biggest hearts, and I know that they do. Railroaders are just wonderful people. And so that's kind of why we do what we do. Most of our children end up, okay. They go on to live wonderful lives. They beat leukemia or cancer or whatever it is. But there's always some that don't. And those kids stick with you, but they drive us to continue to do our work and to continue to be out there and to continue to bring these kids to these railroads so they can have these train-themed wishes. And because we know that there's always going to be a next kid. We always say, wow, when we're done with these events, when's the next kid going to come? We don't want these kids to come, but we know there's always going to be a next time.
Wow. It's so easy for us to sort of underestimate the value of what we do in rail preservation. There's so many organizations that, in the case of childhood illnesses like that, are providing medical care and the sort of the tangible resources, that it's very easy to look at situations like that and feel small in comparison of like, how does rail preservation stack up against the significance of that? But I think that what you've illustrated there is how there is a great power in what we do to make people happy. There is so much pain and suffering in the world that is beyond a lot of our control. But if we can take this thing that we love and turn it into something that not just we enjoy, but that we could share that with others, no matter how healthy or not they may be, and use it as a tool for healing, I think that's really powerful in and of itself. And it's so great that you've found a way of doing that, and you've partnered with organizations that see the value in that, because I think that sticks with you, as you illustrated. Those memories stick with you, and hopefully for the parents of Victor, it's not just the emptiness and the sorrow that comes from losing a child, but also this feeling of the community came together, whether it be their friends or neighbors, and in this case, the railroad, And I think that's really important.
Absolutely, and that's really what drives us and keeps us motivated, because all the railroads we work with, they love this charity work. I mean, every single railroad that we work with is committed to not only their local communities, but to help these national foundations out, such as the Make-A-Wish, which is national. And it kind of leads us into, our veterans work. We've been working with veterans foundations now for a little while. And veterans are another thing that's really near and dear to my heart. People that have fought for this nation and fought for our freedom, because we must understand that freedom is not free. And we have lost so many Americans to conflicts and wars throughout time. And so veterans were something that we really wanted to key in on and get involved in. And just this last year, we unveiled our Salute to Veterans motor car, WCRG 574, and that motor car is decorated up to honor our nation's veterans. And that motor car, again, can be seen on excursions and veterans fundraisers and whatever, if Honor Flight says, hey, we're doing an event in Reno, can you bring this car down? We say, sure, no problem. The car was recently at the Atlantis Casino and Spa for the Honor Flight Luncheon and Gold Star Families tree lighting that was done at the end of November. And it was fantastic to see the families, even though they were having grief, that they felt like, wow, there's people out there that care about, my son that was killed in combat. And one of the fathers, Paul Steinbecker, whose son Nick was killed in Afghanistan, had came up to me when I was next to the motor car, which was in the ballroom. And he just looked at it and said, wow, this is really fantastic what you guys are doing. And he pulled a coin out of his pocket and set it on the motor car and said, this was my son. And it was a picture of his son from combat. And so those things move you. They cut right to your soul. You realize that, again, people fought for this country. Life is precious. And, as the event went on and you watch the Gold Star families go up and hang the ornaments on the Christmas tree, and you're part of this, and you realize that these people have lost it. They've lost it. When you lose a child, you lose everything. And I've never lost a child, so I can't compare to the pain they're having, but I can understand that it changes their life. And so if we can be a little part of these veterans organizations and bring a little bit of money into them, and Honor Flight nationwide, they have chapters all over the place. They have a Northern Nevada chapter. That's the chapter that we work with. Honor Flight is a fantastic organization. Honor Flight sends our nation's veterans back to see their memorials in Washington, D.C. free of charge. So what we've done with Honor Flight is we've done motorcar excursion fundraisers to where we'll set a weekend. We actually have one coming up in about 2 weeks on the Virginia and Truckee, where that's going to be a 3-day event. It's a fundraiser for Honor Flight. So we will raise money for them through the excursions, and we will also invite the local veterans out to come out and ride along, to have this really unique experience. And last year we had 96-year-old Bob LeGroy from the Reno area, who was a World War II veteran. And it was fantastic to see the smile on his face when we came back into town and said, I can't believe how wonderful this was. I had no idea that we could even do something like this. And so you see the smiles on their face. And, we worked with the Mighty Oaks Foundation, another fantastic organization nationwide that helps veterans from combat that are struggling with PTSD. So if you're a veteran and you're having problems and maybe you're thinking about committing suicide, and believe it or not, 22 veterans a day take their lives from suicide because they're dealing with PTSD after combat. So Mighty Oaks will say, call us up, get to the nearest airport, and we'll give you 5 days and we'll heal you. And they are fantastic with what they provide. But we did a fundraiser back in 2020 on the Goose Lake Railway in Oregon. And that was a fantastic fundraiser for them. We invited several of the local veterans from the community to come out and ride along. And so, they were able to do that. And so what we see veterans come out all the time, and again, they have no idea that this is even available to them. Sometimes we will put snippets of these events in the newspaper. Hey, if you want to come out and ride along, we're doing this veterans event. Do you want to ride along? And so they will come out and do that. And a lot of times we'll have reporters that come out and ride along, and they'll do newspaper articles and stories on the event. And on that particular excursion in 2020, we had a veteran and a Lake County Examiner newspaper reporter named Paul Raines that had came out and rode the whole trip with us. And when we got done, he had walked up to me and he thanked me and shook my hand and said, I can't believe that people actually care about me. I didn't think anybody cared about my service. I've struggled with my combat for years, and I can't believe you guys care about me. Thank you. I said, well, no, thank you for your service, because that's why we're able to do these events, because we live in a free country. But for a lot of veterans, they don't think anybody cares about them, and that's couldn't be farther from the truth, because our organization and mainly the whole country, they thank veterans every day. But the veterans need to hear that. They need to hear that people care about them. And so our work with those two partnerships has been fantastic and phenomenal. We've raised a lot of money for both of those organizations. And again, the chance to have people come out, we had one guy, Phil Williams from the Reno area. He was in Vietnam, on a Huey chopper, and again, he's all smiles and goes, "Wow, this is fantastic." And and a lot of times the veterans are meeting other veterans. Oh, where are you from? I'm from Reno too. Oh, you're from Reno, and they actually build friendships, because now they've met another veteran, and they all have that camaraderie from being in the armed forces. So it's really fantastic to be able to put these events on and raise a little money for these organizations and bring some people together for a worthy cause like this.
For those who are involved with tourist railroads, museums, nonprofits in rail preservation, or even those in the for-profit short-line freight sector, what advice would you offer, given your experience of networking and trying to make opportunities happen for folks in need? What advice would you give them for finding community partners, whether community be local to their region or national, to try to make things like that happen and to provide more experiences like that for folks in need in their area?
Well, first of all, it takes a lot of knocking on doors. You have to be able to reach out, and sometimes you get told no, and that's okay. And sometimes you go back and you try again with a different idea or a different strategy to how you want to do what you want to do. I mean, there's nothing more challenging right now than, trying to work with a lot of railroads. I mean, a lot of the short line mom and pops we're seeing are being bought up by, short line holdings company that may own 50 railroads across the United States. Do they want to bother with motor cars? No, they don't. And for a lot of good reason. I mean, there's a reason why motor cars are phased out, not only because of the advent of the high rail and the benefits of the high rail, but these were also dangerous machines. There were many, many railroaders killed on these machines. So while, it's great to be able to run these machines, we have to be very careful on how we do it with safety practices and policies and procedures. But, most railroads that we run into are more than willing to have us come in and sit down in their office and talk to them and make a proposal to, okay, this is what we'd like to do. Here's how we want to do it. And here's how we can make it happen. Here's how we can benefit you. So, the age-old game of railroading and rail fanning and preservation kind of all run together. There's always going to be people that want to preserve something of the rail industry. There's always going to be people interested in trains. There's always going to be railroads that are more than willing and inviting to people, and there's always going to be some that aren't. There's a big conglomerate short line holdings in California that don't want anything to do with motor cars, and we've tried, and other people have tried, and their attitude is they just don't want anything. So that's fine, we move on. But there's a lot of other railroads that do and are willing to do this with us and do these fundraisers or use our services for fire patrol or inspections or other things, whatever else it can be. But, our partnerships always lead to more. For example, the Goose Lake Railway is a perfect example. We started out doing excursions for the Mighty Oaks Foundation. That has also led into other charitable events, such as our Christmas events that we now do with them, where we'll pick one day close to Christmas, and the railroad will advertise it, and the local community will advertise it, and we will go up and we will bring a motor car, and we will provide rides for local kids, and then we will have needy people that need gifts. We will have, tables and tables of just gifts for the community. And so we will have people that come out that are in need, and they can get a free gift, and there's coffee and cookies and hot chocolate, and Santa Claus comes, and kids can sit on Santa's lap and tell them what they want. So it's really a wonderful partnership that we build with these railroads. But no matter what you're doing with a railroad, or anything for that matter, I mean, communication builds trust, and that's what you need. You need to have that communication, and the communication also builds relationships. So you're building trust and relationships with these railroads and these general managers or owners or whoever it may be, to where they trust what you're doing, and they also get behind what you're doing because maybe it's personal to them. An example of the Goose Lake Railroad, one of the operations managers there, the Mighty Oaks Foundation is very near and dear to his heart. And so when we do those charities with him for Mighty Oaks, it's personal to him. It's more than just a business deal or, hey, I got these guys on the tracks today, doing a motor car excursion. It takes away my Saturday. No, this is personal to him. And when we finish, it's personal to him. He takes that home and knows that, hey, you know what? I may run freight, 31 days out of the month, but this one day in this month was really important to me. And so we see that a lot. And, preservation is going to go on. It's been with us ever since, trains were invented. And it's wonderful because you don't see museums for garbage trucks, nobody preserves garbage trucks. But there's always going to be a new generation of rail fans. It's inevitable. Are the rail fans of this generation? Is a 16-year-old kid that's growing up, watching an AC-44 GE on the head end of a UP train or a Siemens SC-44 Charger on an Amtrak train? Are they going to be interested in motor cars? Maybe not. But someday, they're going to get older and they're going to go, I remember when I seen those, GEs on the head end of a freight, and by the time they get to 60, it'll be some battery-powered hybrid probably. But every generation seems to want to preserve something of their past. And for most of the generation that we see that are interested in motor cars, it's because they saw those as a child. They have some kind of connection to that. And so that's what helps us with the preservation. There's so many people that are interested in wanting to continue the preservation of motor cars.
Very impressive. Their website is westcoastrailroadersgroup.com. You could see what upcoming excursions and events that they have. Ken, thank you so much for joining us here on the Roundhouse and talking about the nature of the work and outreach that you have going on. Really phenomenal stuff, and I look forward to hearing more of your adventures down the line.
Thank you, Nick. It was a pleasure to be with you.
And now, the question of the day.
Last time on the Roundhouse, we were talking to Michael and Allie French, the owners of the Cafe Lafayette dinner train, about dinner trains, about dining on the rails. And of course, this led me to ask you guys, what is your favorite experience dining on a train? I'm going to give you a warning right now with some of these responses. Make sure you've eaten. The responses, of which there were many on social media, are delicious. First of all, Robert John Davis writes, wow, hard to choose. The Napa Valley wine train was flawless. Also had some great meals on the Cafe Lafayette in New Hampshire, but I guess my favorite does go to Railway Touring Company Steam Excursion in England with first-class silver service breakfast and dinner. Actually had 2 great RTC trips. Demnian Jack writes, I hope I could cheat and offer 2 best experiences for 2 distinct categories. In terms of fine dining and the glamour of dining cars, the best experience I've had was the superior dining service on the Potomac Eagle. The other experience was more sensory and recreating a moment in history, having a couple Polish sausages that were cooked on the back head of a steam engine that I had the opportunity to have some handle time on. Mark Kavanaugh writes, my best experience was on the Alaska Railroad. We had booked a post-cruise land tour to Denali and Fairbanks. The train ride was from Denali to Fairbanks on the double-deck car at the end of the train. Dining was downstairs. It was not just the best meal I have ever had on a train, but possibly the best meal I ever had in a restaurant. I had halibut with couscous. I am not a big halibut or couscous fan, but it turned out so perfect and so delicious. The meals were cooked on board, not microwaved. Service was top-notch. The whole train ride was simply spectacular. I've been on some dinner trains where the food is pretty good. I eat on the Japan Shinkansen dining car once. They no longer offer dining car service. Agreed with you, Mark. Having been on the Alaska Railroad, their food service is phenomenal. Thomas Wyndham writes, I got a driver for a day experience as a birthday present. For lunch, we cooked bacon and such for some footplate sandwiches on a shovel in the firebox. It gave a very unique flavor for sure. And lastly, Ken Dar writes, eating lunch in the dining car on the California Zephyr, enjoying the free entertainment of Moon River. If you know, you know. Well, Ken, I guess now we know, which is good. I'm going to throw my own in here. One of my favorite creative things, I was at the Lakeshore Railway Museum in Northeast PA, and as a special event, they had Visco 6, which is an 040 tank engine, visiting. And one of the things that they did was they hooked the boiler up to a steamer for steaming corn on the cob. That was pretty good. They also threw popcorn into the firebox, and sure enough, out the stack came these popped but soot-covered kernels of popcorn. And yes, I did try one, and no, I would not recommend it, at least not with a copious amount of salt. Your question of the day for this episode is, what is an event or organization that you've been part of that benefited your community? For this one, it doesn't have to be rail related. I want to see what you've been part of that had meaning to you and that you believe had meaning to others. Let me know on the roundhousepodcast.com. Links to social media there. Thank you guys for tuning in to yet another episode of the Roundhouse Podcast, where we go on all sorts of adventures together. I thank you for being part of the journey, especially those of you who are supporting the show on Patreon. Remember, as always, the Roundhouse is our house.